Chapter 1. La Quema. The culmination of existence for a mouse was in actuality very similar to that of a man. Toil, consume, rest, survive, reproduce, fear, loneliness, priorities, and most important of all, the acquisition of companionship in some form. Such was the case with little Ulprecht, a simple white mouse born somewhere on the South American continent. While Ulprecht had no siblings, offspring, or a mate, he found his truest of friends in Sombra, a female, middle-aged tuxedo cat of considerably larger than average size. The unlikely duo of cat and mouse lived in a small home in a small village with their human keepers, 6-year-old Celia and her loving, hard-working parents. Sombra was the outright center of Celia's minuscule universe. Whenever the two were indoors at the same time, the feline was ever upon the little girl's heels. The 20-pound tuxedo cat spent much of her sleeping time utilizing Celia as her personal bed. Celia loved to watch the oversized cat rise up from her nuzzle of warm blankets and briefly stretch her long limbs. When her black quartet of legs was extended to their full length, Sombra could easily measure at 2/3 the standing size of the young girl. And though the cat was perfectly capable of hunting and killing and fighting, Sombra was a peaceful giant that was accustomed to most of her nourishment being provided by her human domesticators. Thus, hunting and eating a small, friendly mouse was quite beneath the desires of the well-cared-for cat. From Ulprecht's earliest encounter with Sombra, never did he truly feel as though the natural predator was in fact a threat to him. While physically formidable, the tuxedo cat's appearance possessed qualities of gentle, irrefutable beauty. Her midnight coat was decorated below the pink nostrils, down her neck and upon her underbelly with a soft, flowing sea of white fur. Each paw and the tip of her tail were dabbed in pure white, as if the cat had naively ventured into a pan filled with wet paint. Sombra's eyes were the typical eyes of a tuxedo feline, the most elegant, ever-living kind of cat's eye. Swirling tourmaline orbs with deep black centers that showed an encircling of deep blue when the sun peered directly into them. They were fierce eyes, but never ones that truly expressed anger, at least not that Ulprecht had ever seen. As far as all things beautiful in any sense of the word went, Ulprecht was far from inspiring to look upon, even as far as mice went. The typical shades of short, gray and white fur, beady, black little eyes, a tiny pink and black tail. Though physically unassuming in appearance, Ulprecht was particularly insightful for a member of his species, despite the mouse having no concept of time or age, long or short. For Ulprecht, there was only the concept of survival and coexistence with the few who he was close to in life. The life of any mouse was hardly unique in every case, and thus the notion of counting days and keeping track of the years as they passed was unfounded in such small-minded a creature. While she was a far more complex configuration of life, young Celia shared many similarities of Ulprecht the mouse. Her village was very small, and there were less than a handful of children, all of which were 3 years or more her senior, and had no interest in playing with her. Celia was an only child and very much partnerless in the world of man. If not for the existence of his unlikely companion Sombra the cat, Ulprecht too would have been alone in his small world. And so, she bonded with animals instead. Sombra was officially her only pet. Still, South America provided more than enough wild or stray animals to occupy Celia's time and attention. There was nothing slithering, 8-legged, or fanged on this earth that could so easily frighten off the pesky girl. While accompanying her father at 4 years of age on a particularly fruitless afternoon of freshwater fishing, little Celia managed to grab a live fish right out of the water with her 2 bare hands. Life in her small South American village may have provided more challenging trappings for Celia, and yet the course of her life was hardly one that strayed from traditional, normal childhood. Excitement, boredom, curiosity, fear, fleeting thoughts, hard lessons, rivalries with other children, simple hobbies, scrapes and bruises, struggles against parental authority. Despite the poorer life she had been born into, Celia would have been no happier in the lap of luxury than she was now. She loved and appreciated the ones she was fortunate enough to have in her life. Celia made the absolute best of the existence she was born into. There was simply something about animals that made the young girl feel more connected than with other people. Her relationships with the beasts of the world felt much deeper somehow, despite not being able to have Sombra or Ulprek carry on their halves of Celia's conversations. The relationship was somewhat symbiotic, regardless of the fact that neither party truly depended on another. Perhaps a relationship of such fashioning was the most symbiotic of any coupling. Neither symbiont was genetically inclined or drawn upon by some reach of nature to the other, and still the two inevitably became as one. The trio of girl, feline, and rodent was one that was of an existence that disregarded entirely the most fundamental laws of nature. For did not the cat hunt the mouse? Did not a human consume the flesh of most of the world's four-legged, fur-covered creatures? Celia, Ulprek, and Sombra lived together with no more of a care than passing the hours with one another. Celia's parents, on the other hand, were fraught with cares and great troubles. Their minds were occupied with grand fears of something oncoming, something creeping just beyond the outlying reaches of the jungle, something that consumed the homes and lives of good people and extinguished every piece of nature that it tasted, the way a roaring blaze would. Celia was too young to share the apprehensions of her mother and father, too young to understand or care. But the prospect of La Quema, or the burning, was nonetheless one that Celia was marginally aware of in overhearing the conversations of her anxious family. "We won't burn. Not you and me, Ulprek," Celia spoke softly as she cradled the soft mouse in both of her tiny hands. "I'll run far away with you and Sombra. Yes, you can ride in one of my pockets, or I can find you a nice hat or box to carry you in." By the time late August had come, Celia's parents became so fearful of the wicked evils gradually swallowing their irreproachable slice of the world that they forbade their daughter from traveling outside of the village altogether. The adventurous girl naturally objected in outrage, Sombra and Ulprek looking on from their corners and wall crevices. In the grand scheme of things, it really didn't make a bit of difference what Celia did during her time spent outdoors, for no parent could keep a constant watch on their child, and no child would remain forever in obedience of the wishes of their caretaking elders. Celia's disobedient journey into the forbidden places was as much of a guarantee as sun in the afternoon sky. The injunctions of Celia's mother and father were well-intentioned, but ultimately futile. When La Quema did finally rear itself, it would be a remorseless, cataclysmic force without boundaries. It would be a thing that no mortal could stray from. The early September morning on which it finally came, Celia's parents instructed her to remain indoors and not to let anyone inside for any reason whatsoever. The great fire had begun to spread itself upon the rooftops along the southern half of the village. When her parents left to go and fight the fearsome blaze, they did not arm themselves with any recognizable firefighting tools. Celia's parents exited their home carrying 2 loaded, black, .22 caliber handguns. Gunfire, the uncertain voices of her neighbors, screams of terror, pleas for mercy. Within minutes of her mother and father fleeing outdoors to fight, Celia's ears were filled with the sound of hellish pandemonium. She dared not look out of the window the way she did during a dangerous storm. Not even the most over-curious portion of her wished for the slightest glimpse of the one-sided slaughter that warranted such awful noise. This was different than one of the jungle's numerous natural threats to a girl of 6 years. There was truly no point in Celia rushing to lay eyes on the thing outside of her window, for it would come for her. It would force Celia to look upon its bleak, burning form very soon. "She looks so frightened, Sombra. I wish there was something we could do to help. Oh, this is wrong." This is just all wrong," Ulrich spoke in a growing panic to his feline friend. The horrible sounds grew nearer to the quiet house. The roof began to quake successively. The glass upon the windows and doors shook and rattled. The entire house was filled with the sound of 1,000 tiny hammers beating against the many panes. More gunfire. The sound of an automobile colliding with a nearby house and then exploding. The falling of scattered debris upon the street. More screams of agony. More pleas for mercy. And just before the demonic roaring and rumbling had rolled onto the front step of the small home, Celia's ears heard 2 final distressed, choking cries of pain whose unmistakable likeness turned Celia's heart to lead that sunk into the pit of her stomach. It was her mother and father being killed. The front door of the house was not smashed down or forced open with blunt force. Instead, the doorknob, deadbolt lock, and both door hinges began to twinkle with fiery, flickering molten tears of liquefied metal. Once each metal part had been sufficiently melted beyond recognition, the door flopped lazily inward onto the floor, sending tufts of gray dust and dirt racing through the air and returning again to the wooden floor. Celia's young eyes were at last rewarded with their glimpse outside. Her ears capably discerned some degree of the appalling spectacle just beyond the walls of where she was hiding. Terrible though these anticipated things were to finally behold, even more terrible were the things her eyes witnessed that her ears and mind failed to anticipate. Among the bodies of her slaughtered neighbors and the senseless, burning chaos, Celia saw other familiar people being dragged into the jungle by something she initially believed to be something her eyes had failed to competently discern, perhaps due to the smoke and fire and the dust kicked up by the dozens of struggling feet as their owners were carried off to their deaths. It looked as though a man dressed from head to toe in the color of midnight lacquer was dragging his feet across the ground in a ghoulish manner as it slid toward its prey. Its shade of black was one that Celia's eyes were unaccustomed to. Like a sheet of the starless eve had been ripped from above and draped upon the indiscernible thing. There were no men at all, at least not men of this world. Just then, one of the black demons materialized before Celia's widened, terrified eyes. It rose up from the spot on the ground where the door lay, like a dark bedsheet being pulled upward by a trio of pinched fingers. Each of the living creatures within the house watched in petrified silence as the thing rose to 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, 6. The monster sprouted 2 long, fearsome-looking arms. Its left limb ended in a crude-looking sort of crustacean claw. Its right arm possessed the 5-fingered end of a man. The horrific thing slid quickly towards Celia as she desperately crawled backward in the opposite direction of her pursuer. It stopped a few feet in front of Celia once she had been backed into a corner and slammed its human hand to the ground in a fist, immediately setting fire to the entire interior of the house that surrounded them. The fire was everywhere. Smoke quickly began to fill up the small home. As Ulrich took one final glance behind during his desperate scurry toward the only window, he saw the shadowy, contorted monster with its mutant crab claw raised in the air before the terrified little girl. The crustaceous appendage swung energetically from left to right, lopping the helpless Celia in half at mid-torso. Ulrich was not able to make the climb to the windowsill on his own. Thankfully, as the black monster had set his eyes on the defenseless mouse, Ulrich felt a thin set of sharp fangs grip him just behind the neck, then jerk him off of his feet and send him soaring into the air, first up to the windowsill that seemed impossibly out of reach a second ago, then smoothly through the air and out into the soft garden beside the house before feeling the soft bite release him to the ground. Sombra! Thank you, my friend. Ulrich threw his arms around the neck of the oversized tuxedo feline and swung himself into the mounting position upon her back. As his upper appendages held tightly to the soft, warm fur of the cat, the pair of them began to move as if they were riders upon the wind itself. Sombra stayed well out of range of any flames without so much as a second guess to the certainty of where each step would safely find a home. Ulprich was carried in the safest, most direct trajectory leading out of the doomed village, which was now blanketed completely in unforgiving blazes of red-orange.